So we're back on page 5-ish, 250, just kind of revisiting with you. Incredible amount of persecution at that particular point in time under Diocletian. Probably the most severe, the most widespread, pretty much a three-pronged approach by Diocletian was, first of all, destroy all the pastors, second of all, destroy all the churches, third of all, destroy all the Bibles. Mm-hmm. In fact, he was very successful in destroying all the Bibles because going back in the availability of texts, there really are no whole Bible text or whole New Testament text or whole full text prior to his persecution, 300. As many as 12,000 different fragments, but really nothing of that larger caliber. And so he was very successful in destroying full texts. Interesting story, you know, during the period of the different ones that would kind of yield to the persecution, the stories are told about soldiers coming into the church and asking for the texts. You know, have your Bible? We're going to destroy the Bible. Did you have? And so they'd go in the back and they'd bring out a text, but it wouldn't be the Bible. And he said, well, how did you get away with that? And he said, well, this is it, here you go. And it could be Homer or it could be anything else. Yeah. Well, most of those soldiers were not really very literate, and Greek was very difficult for them to really work their way through. So they just took for granted they had Bibles. But mind you, having done that, that was considered an apostate action by the Donatists. The Donatists were those who were extremely legalistic as to it's either, martyrdom or you're an apostate. I mean, you give it all, So these were considered those that I mentioned last week, elapsed, that Donatists basically rejected from re-entering into fellowship, into the church. When, and if they would yield, they also practiced a rebaptism. If you've lapsed, if you have yielded to the persecution and you've become a traitor, there's a Latin word for being traitors, they had to be rebaptized. So that really did ignite Constantine's anger, because he was all about unity within the church. Coming to Constantine now, coming out of this time period, you look carefully at, now I want to remind you, what exactly is this course? Yeah? History. No, not just history. What's it say under there? Is it
church?
A brief summary.
A brief summary, okay? So, having 5 weeks to cover this, and the material, Pastor Lee put this together a number of years ago, and specifically stated a brief summary, and he, in fact, is right. There are certain things you're just going to fly over. Other things may not even mention, as what I just handed out to you. But when you take a look at the entrance of Constantine, you look at a guy who has had some interesting experiences prior to what we read here on page 7. He's following his father. He steps into a role of co-leadership, and Maxentius and he are, carrying this load, and then they get into it as to, who's going to take the lead. And Constantine, very intelligent leader, he confronts at the Milvian Bridge in 312, has an incredible battle, and the record of history says that he had a dream, and he had this vision in the sun. Interesting study of Constantine. He emphasized in the sun. So Invictus, another vision he had some 3 or 4 years earlier of a sun and a sign of the sun, and he worshipped the sun god. He was a pagan, and he's coming to this place. This was not an abnormal thing for generals and great leaders to lead their armies with the kind of the inspiration of one of their gods. And the critics of Constantine are not convinced that he had a genuine and sincere conversion. All of this fit well, and as a matter of fact, some years, even after the events that we're reading here, in Constantinople, even to this day, there is a statue to Sol Invictus that basically, at the time when it was built, was an image of Constantine on the top. This image doesn't stand there anymore. But on another occasion, he was approached to give an accepted approval of a pagan place of worship, which he gave. Which again, raises a lot of question as to the sincerity of his faith. But as it was, as for the church, on the one side, everybody thought, this is wonderful. He has a heart for the church. His mother she was just incredibly generous and wanted to see churches built right, left, and everywhere. And she did finance a number of church buildings being built. In his transformation, he dealt with, as is mentioned there, he acted as a judge in the Donatist controversy, and he dealt with them and brought about an amnesty to the Donatists in respect to their confrontation with some. And in 325, in the Council of Nicaea, he at that time called together this council. And that's a real issue, because who is Constantine? I mean, he's an emperor. He's not a church leader, although he forced himself into a role of such leadership. And so really that is an interesting mark concerning that period of time. During that time period as well, the first step that he took for the church is the Edict of Milan in 313, where he gives Christianity a legal status. But it's not until 380 that he actually makes Christianity the religion of the state. Again, on both accounts, one might say that's a good thing for the church. Is it? Was it? Remember last week I did say that it was in the persecution of the church down through the centuries that the church has genuinely grown. That the blood of the martyr is the seed of the church. I remember I mentioned some 2.5 million believers in China in 49, and just within the last 10 years, the account is up somewhere in the ballpark of some 17 million believers during these years of great persecution. Persecution does grow the church. And why? Well, first of all, it rules out the sense of just... It rules out the sense of apathy, rules out the sense of, I want to give everybody that. By the way, I'm going to give you that thing. The sense of lethargy and nominalism. In other words, if you were a believer during a time of persecution, you meant business, because you knew it would cost you your life, it would cost you everything. And this is Well, what happens when Christianity is made religion of the state? Well, not only is it convenient, it is beneficial. I say, well, I want to run my business. And one of the things that really got me, I can't tell you that, thankfully wasn't a whole lot of occasions, but I had to, on occasion, get a guy aside, say, listen, brother, this is church. We're going to do business here. We don't sell real estate. We don't sell insurance. We don't try to build Shackley, remember Shackley? You know, I don't know what they remember. It has vitamin stuff. You know, don't do your business here. It's just not what the church is all about. But since the church is now a state religion and such, it's beneficial in that respect. So it draws in people in that way of hey, gee, this is a great opportunity for me to interact with others. But then it also does this. And I can't, and I don't have the time to get into a real long diatribe about the mother-child religion. But in the Old Testament, we read some references in Jeremiah particularly, and again in Ezekiel about Tammuz, and about the Queen of Heaven. You say, well, who is that? Well, it's a pagan worship, and it is all around the mother-child. And it found itself having roots in Egypt, and then in the Syrian, and then into the Grecian, and then into the Roman. You know, you have Cupid and mother, and you have other types of the sun god, and it goes on and on. I just like I said, I didn't really put a lot of time in on the names and all of that. Just bringing reference to it that such existed in the Roman and Greek community amongst all of the other pagan worships. These priests would no longer have really a place of a following. So it naturally avails itself in the theology of the New Testament that Mary has been approached and she has been, given the responsibility to carry the Christ child. And so out of what is a very simple story and a very, a rich story, it is embellished to such a degree that you can go back archaeologically and you can look at some of those pictures of Isis, and you can look at the picture of Tammuz, and you look at that mother-child situation, or the relics, and then you look at some of the relics of the liturgical church today that has the Madonna and the Christ child. So, how is it that it goes like so far? Because I see this transition in Constantine's time of not only socially but religiously a kind of a blending, kind of a melting pot theologically, and so much of the theology as we read about it in these various doctrinal councils and such just open the door to this kind of stuff. And so you have a truly watered down Christianity growing. When you get to the place that I want you to end for today, you have the statement that we had just before the early reformers: the stage was now set for the Reformation, and referring to the corruption and immorality. Well, how does that come to pass? Well, it is not and was never a good thing for the Christian church to be made the church of the state. I think it's a wonderful thing to have freedom of religion, but there are 7 qualities or 7 particular matters of identity of Baptists. And I know that this is a Baptistic church where we are at now. Doesn't put Baptist on the name. Churches I pastor over here are Baptist. But other things that identify a Baptist, one of them is referred to as soul liberty. Baptists have been noted from the time of Roger Williams, which you will see referred to, where, and he took a beating for this in early America. It's a whole other study. But the concept was, you individuals have a right to believe or not believe. And it is not our place as believers to strong-arm and force people to believe what we believe. The New Testament, what does Jesus say to the disciples or to the 72 he sends out? If you are not received, shake the dust off your feet and just move your way. You don't force the issue. And in this particular case, as things continued to progress along the way, bam, it became very significant groundwork for what later would be the Catholic Church running around during the Crusades and twisting everybody's arm and killing people and you know, doing all kinds of persecution, starting with the Muslims but then ending with anybody and everybody. I handed out the material last week on the Nicene Creed. And I did so because I wanted to just, you know, give you some food for thought as to one that I really believe is probably the most clear. I personally feel is better, it's more detailed than the Apostles' Creed. But Dr. Al Mohler talks about, in his introduction to the Apostles' Creed, he talks about benefits of creeds. And why did creeds come about? Well, in a time period that we're looking at now, we're seeing the church struggling tremendously with so many different ways of thinking. And he points out these just really quickly. He said, first of all, creeds define truth. All true Christians believe what are in the creeds, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and more.
That's right. Yeah.
But all Christians do not believe what are in the creeds, or they're not Christians. Because these creeds are, if you want to say, just the very bones of our faith, which we'll talk about in just a second, defines truth, but they're written also to correct error, which, as you read, the Nicene Creed was established initially to correct error, to deal with that which had kind of grown out of misunderstanding and misteaching. 3, it provides rules for growth. It gives kind of like the guide bars on the side of the road. As you're growing, as you're teaching, you know, in that process of nurturing, you know, you're always marking, you're always checking, and am I within the realm of biblical teaching? Because the creeds are always biblically founded. As it goes on, he points out that it directs our worship. It provides a basis for worship, a basis for our approach to God, our approach to how we might conduct ourselves within the fellowship and how we might conduct ourselves coming before the Lord in worship and praise. And then it also connects us with the fathers of the faith. It connects us with our family. Because when you look at the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Athanasius Creed, well, what are you looking at? You're looking at something that Pastor Keith wrote up, Pastor James wrote up, whoever, you know, your pastor, you know, no. You're looking at something that Pastor Chris wrote, that I wrote, no. You're looking at something that was written hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years ago. But it's part of our family. Remember I said that. We're a family. And it is a family claim, a family proclamation, a family statement, creedal. I believe, we believe, together, and we have continued to believe generation in, generation out, generation in, generation out. It also connects in a way of, or rather it connects with that, and it also provides a faith summary. As I said, all believers believe it, and more. All right? Some believe more this way, some believe more that way, but at the very least, it gives us a summary, and it makes it easy to pass on and to teach. And then last of all, the 7th thing is to establish unity. And that was really an intention. That's the reason why there was so much fight, and there has been to this day, about that little tiny bit in the Nicene Creed as to you know, the Holy Spirit being from, not just proceeding from the Father, but proceeding from the Father and the Son. And so, you know, there's a continual people, well, let's take it out because it's caused division. No, let's not take it out because it's truth. And it's, again, once an interesting moment comes to pass when you look at something like that and, you know, you say, well, should we take unity? Well, unity comes from a oneness in truth, not a compromise in truth, but a oneness in truth. And so, as we look at the creeds, they were intended to bring about together on a strong foundation. Pastor Lee noted that he said, Constantine was baptized on his deathbed. It raises another concern, about his sincerity of his faith. Why does he wait till he dies? The supposition is that he believed in baptismal regeneration and thought, I better get baptized, I'm not going to go to heaven. But once again, he came to the place and left the scene during that century. We had the confirmation of the 27 books of the New Testament. We said already that, they'd been accepted by the church quite some time earlier, but here they were just confirmed. And the canon was universally accepted, Council of Carthage. And so we move on from there. State religion, 380, millions of people become members of the church, and not because of conversion, but because it's convenient. Moving on from, and again, I noticed as I went working through this, and all of a sudden, time just slipped by. It was like in warp speed, 400 to 1300. Church became increasingly corrupt. Both language and culture strained their relations. Theological difference began to develop between the East and the West. Many pagans here now flooding the church, and bringing many pagan rites practiced like incense, holy water, beads. First pope was named Leo the Great, and becomes Bishop of Rome, and claimed to be the Bishop of Rome was the successor of Apostle Peter. Pastor Lee was very, he's very caught about, giving us, what's all about with the Catholic Church. But it's at this point I want to add to this. Leo was excommunicated by a patriarch in the Eastern Church, because it was by this time that the Eastern and the Western Church were at odds with each other. Now, Constantine had he'd been putting a lot of work and effort in redirecting all of the attention and all of the activities to Constantinople. And Rome was, kind of falling back on the back burner. And so, as time passed, you had two different groups, by the way. You had these that were more comfortable with the Greek and had little knowledge or any interest in Latin. And here you had the Latin church over here. And he looked down upon those of the Greek. And, it was just, there were a variety of things that were going on that set the stage. The filiole, the passage here, and of the Son, in the Nicene Creed is referred to as the breaking point or the dividing point. It's at that particular point when there was this give and take between Leo and the Patriarch in Constantinople, that it was still in Spain and France, that this entrance, this change in the Nicene Creed was still kind of being added and floating along. It hadn't even reached Rome yet. And the point that I make on this is that and I got a side issue over here that I'll use as a reference. Don't get me going and don't argue with me. The Civil War is not all about slavery. All right? The Civil War in this country had a lot of contributing factors to break the country in half. And state rights was incredibly centered on that. And a lot of other political issues. Yes, slavery was right up there on the front burner. But when you study which is something I did down through the years, so that's why I referred to it. And we said, well, wait a minute, it's not that simple. As such is the case here concerning the break of the East from the West. It's not just that simple. Logos is a Bible program for the internet, and there is a Orthodox elder that is one of the editors. And he's calling, and he set up a website to get rid of that phrase from the creed. Today, right now, so that we would have unity. The issue that I see in this is that's not going to bring the East and the West together, because it was not just this one issue. It's easy to point all of our attention. If you will go online and you'll look up this, it's a Latin word, and when I looked at it, every time some of these words I look at, I say, really, I'm not a Latin scholar. Filioque is the way that most people pronounce it. Filioque is the Latin word for with the Son. Just put in filioque on your, Google search.
How do you spell it?
And how do you spell it? Filioque. Filioque. It just runs on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And you will find all of these references. This is the reason. No, things were falling apart. And even at the place where Leo becomes bishop in 440, there is some antagonism, there is some anger, there is some battling back and forth, and it only continues to get worse, where one's excommunicating the other's excommunicating this, and back and forth. Now, I'm going to give you some material tonight, and I'm going to send you back home to do me 3 paragraphs, not one, but 3 different groups. The first group can be dated all the way back, and not necessarily in an organized manner, and I'm not going to talk to you and tell you they were Baptists. There was a group that eventually became known as the Waldensians. Now, the Waldensians basically, in these years, if you want to say by geographical, and I'll give you the material and you can read about it, they were a people of the Bible. And originally it was not Waldensian, it was Bondian Valley, which then eventually was Wall, and then Waldensians. Basically, were a people that stepped aside. And what I give you today will also have a doctrinal statement. When I give you that doctrinal statement, you'll say, well, yeah, okay, that's a lot of things that I would say, yeah. But the point you'll see in the doctrinal statement is the rejection of the doctrines that were developing in the Catholic Church. And when you say the church, all right, you see the fall of Rome, and things just begin to go more and more toward religious and political combined movement. You say, okay, where is the church of true believers? Yeah. If I had been there, I would not be in that church. I say this without any apology. I would be out there in the mountains with the Waldensians. In time, over the years, and this is not necessarily as far back, but you'll see the time table that I will give you goes all the way back to 58. But in time, in the mountains, they had the 3 or 4 different buildings, and you can look them up and get even more information, that made up their college. And their college is just simply a place for young people and for, new believers to study the Bible and to grow in their faith so they'll go out and tell others about Christ. Very simple life. a life-changing experience. And there was one of the buildings that even to this day you can visit. This has a large stone top, and there's a big Bible in the center of it. And this was the table, and I guess even to this day, is the table for copying the Bible. And as a young student, part of your curriculum to learn the Bible was to copy the Bible, and copy it. It was their commitment to have the Bible memorized. They were committed in their travels during the years that we continue to read, getting on to the time of the persecution of the church. You know, someone well said, the persecuted church became the persecuting church in the time of the Crusades. Sure did. And such people who didn't fit the mold, didn't fit the role of Catholicism and the support of Catholicism, they were being persecuted. And so people like the Waldensians would travel, and they would be trained, and some of them would go out as missionaries, and others they would be trained to just go to universities and to study for careers. But in that career, to become missionaries, if you want to say on the down low, missionaries to people in that career. But those who would go out as missionaries would go out at a time when they couldn't take Bibles, and they would take their coats, and they would open the seam of the outer and the inside of the coat, and they would put pages of the Bible inside their coat, and then close it up. And as they would talk to somebody, if there was some interest in, they would open it and would take a page of the Bible and they would hand it out. These are people who are passionate, and they existed during the time period that you're studying right now. The church was not the Catholic Church. And I'll say this, and this, I'm getting on a hobby horse here, but it wasn't the church of the East. It wasn't the church of the West. The church of the East was sitting around moaning and groaning about, the filioque, but at the same time, they took the person of Jesus Christ, and to this very day, the Coptic Church and the Church of the Orthodox background embrace a position that it is not, Christ does not have two natures, but they've established, going as far back as this period of time, that Christ is of the two becoming one nature, which is referred to as monophysism. And it's referred to in the sense that it's not two natures, holy God and holy man, but creating a totally new creation. This is heresy, just flat out. And when you look at that, and you consider that this is where they are to this very day, and want to apologize, they don't want to apologize for it. The Catholic Church takes another route. Both churches, though, or both beliefs, follow the same pattern of confessions. The ideas that, a baptismal regeneration. Remember what I said last week. Romans 11:6. If it's by grace, it's no more of works. If it's work, it's no more of grace. If by grace are you saved through faith. That's it. Mm-hmm. That's right. So, I prayed that we should be compassionate, and I am compassionate in respect to, sharing the good news of Christ. But I'm not compassionate in the capacity that our Savior was not compassionate. To whom did Jesus show compassion? He showed compassion to the multitudes, right? He showed compassion to the prostitutes and the tax collectors.
Sure did.
Who did he not show compassion to?
Pharisees.
Pharisees, Sadducees, the ones that taught error. And that's where I get very upset. When I see people who are in roles of leadership in these churches that are, reaching, I say, well, let's become one. Let's be friends. We can't. We can't. Because you're leading people to hell. I mean, that's the bottom line. Yeah. Now, I was not raised in the Catholic Church. My background, my grandmother was. An Irish grandmother who was Catholic, and a Dutch grandfather who was Episcopal. Sad to say, neither one of them was really believers. But I pastored a church, my first church, and 80% of them were converted from Catholicism. And it was an old phrase one of my friends used to say about teenagers. You need to put them into a barrel when they turn 13 and put a top on it. Let them out when they turn 20. All right. Sorry, Aaron.
I disagree.
Now, there were times that I kind of felt like you need to take a converted Catholic for the first 5 years of their conversion, put them in a barrel and put a top over it whenever the priest comes around, or any of the Catholic members in the family. I mean, I had families that basically, where you have split, you know, and so the priest would come around sometime for aunt or from, and they'd get into his face, angry. And when we talk about it, they get angry. I mean, they get you in the face because they left false teaching of the church and came to realize that had they not, they would end up, if they had died, going to hell. Right? And now they're looking at their family and they say, but my family's, you know, they are lost. They're churched, but they're lost. Somebody said, oh, well, you know, Mrs. O'Reilly down the street, you know, she's 70 years old. And every morning she gets up, every single day, and goes down to the morning mass. She's really got to have a place in heaven. Well, Charlotte, you know, not Charlemagne, but Constantine got baptized just before he died. Why? Why does Mrs. O'Reilly go down? And because, you know, you're hedging your bets. Good theological term, I know. But nonetheless, it's a sad condition that, you know, when we look back at church history, we're called upon and we're directed toward all of that which is taking place in Rome, in Constantinople, Alexandria. Even, and one is not even mentioned in the notes, is Augustine. Remember that St. Augustine is in Florida and St. Augustine is in heaven. All right? Augustine, truly a theological, stalwart and referred to, and his teachings utilized, and you know, so many different continued teachings as the years passed by. Read, you know, just for interesting sidebar reading, The City of God. That's about 800 pages. You know, or you know, his confessions. All right. But he was a Catholic leader. He was in the Catholic Church. Now, he did not embrace much of their teaching, but he was still in the mix. That is an anomaly, which then you look back into church history and you start clicking along with different individuals. I have reaped incredible benefits from reading Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ over the years, but he's Catholic. In the Brothers of Common Life. Luther was in the Brothers of Common Life before he came to conversion. But why did I gain any? Because of the manner in which he presents Christ. And so, you know, you kind of sit back and say, man, you know, so close but so far. This is where we look at this entire unfolding of the church. As we see in the notes, there comes a point in time that all of the stage is set, not just for the sense of the East and the West and all of the disagreements and then some of the heresies that come along, but also in the fact that with it, and this is the question that you really want to ask, as you enter the dark ages, how dark are they? Really dark, okay? Really, really dark. You have the carnality in the papacy. You have popes that have 18, 20 children, but they're not supposed to be married. And they're not married, but they have children. And you have popes that, once again, you follow the entire history of the church, and you come up with the time period of having 3 popes all at one time, which is not listed here. Charlemagne, as we're down to the point where he becomes the king of the Franks, has an early attempt to unify the Roman Empire again. And so he was crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire by Leo. And again, you're seeing the continual interchange between the politics and the church. Then you finally reach the Great Schism in 1054, which I've already alluded to, the idea that because of this filioque, there is this schism, this final break. Leo the Ninth from the west, and Constantine the Ninth in the east, try to reconcile, but doesn't happen. They had made an attempt at some particular point, and it was just thrown out after they had their get-together. I'm on page, top of page 10 there. And finally Pope Leo dies, and the delegation takes advantage of the situation and brings back Cerealis for not accepting Roman superiority. There you go, back and forth between these two, the Patriarch Michael Cerealis and Leo. At any rate, that's referred to, and you can always get all kinds of reading on the Great Schism. But when you do so, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find it's all going to boil down to some basic, these were things that were, set for quite some period in time, and then you have this one item that they point to and say, but this is it. So no, that's not all there is to it. Islam is established. You have the entrance of a new religion. You have Muhammad taking strong grip, and you have Jerusalem yielding to the rule of the Muslims, and Islam conquering the Holy Land in the 7th and 8th centuries. So how do you deal with it? Well, like any good Christian, you put on your weapons, and that's right. Right? And you see this. The First Crusade in 1099 kills. They enter the city in Antioch. They kill civilians. They destroy mosques. They pillage the city. No respect for Judaism, because the Jews are seen as Christ killers, and so there's no sense of God's people or anything like that. It just rock and roll, and it continues on, and basically reaches a place. And one has to ask the question: how is it? Eventually, you come down to point 5 there. Eventually, turn the Crusades against pagans, the Baltics, the Russian Eastern Orthodox Christians. Now, once again, east to west. How long before, when you're battling these things, do you turn against yourself? And that's exactly what happened. Which then brought about the Inquisition from the power of the Catholic Church. And if this damage has not been done enough, now comes this. The Inquisitions began as the churches. Now, where do you go? The churches. What church? The Church of Roman Catholicism. Response to what's considered apostasy. According to whom? Considered heresy. According to whom? According to them. Meanwhile, you have believers. Because as we're working out of this time period, you're going to go out of the period of the Waldensians, which don't ever really lose their way, to the Hussites, and then to the Lollards. So who in the world are they? Well, you'll read about them when I hand this material out. Hussites, a little bit later, were pre-Reformation followers and students of John Huss, who was a pre-Reformation reformer. John Wycliffe, had a following, and they were called the Lollards. And these were people that worshipped, and they did not align themselves with the Catholic Church. They took the Bible as the only basis for their learning and teaching. And these are the people I consider the true church.
Amen, yeah.
And I could get really out of whack here, and I have avoided it, and I have because I'm not all totally convinced of it. Like I said, I was saved at a Baptist church. I was nurtured and discipled in a Baptist church. I was called into the ministry in a Baptist church. I went to a Baptist university. I went to a Baptist seminary, and I've pastored 3 Baptist churches. And what do you think I am? I'm a believer, and I'm a Christian first, okay? But there's a little book. I said all of this. There's a little tiny book. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 100 pages. It's called The Trail of Blood. And there are certain Baptists, or have been down through the years, called landmark Baptists, who claim apostolicity, meaning that the Baptist faith can be traced all the way back to the apostles. And when you follow, and this was written by H. Carroll, who was a Southern Baptist in the 1800s, and here's his chart. He has all of this stuff going on up here, you know. You're looking at church history here, and you have the Catholic Church, you got all of, blah, 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 and you got this line down here, and you got this red line, the trail of blood, of the persecution that the Baptists suffered. But in a slightly reduced image, just underneath that, you'll see the Donatists, the Waldensians, the Lollards, the Hussites, and such. You'll see they're being referred to. And so that's where I'm going to go, not the Baptists, but I'm going to say, okay, the evangelicals, the true believers in the Bible, have, all the way from the beginning, have followed along. And when things began to go south, with not just heresy, and again I say, where is heresy if heresy is not found in making Mary a co-mediatrix to Jesus? Where is heresy if one is going to, you know, establish the necessity for the last rites and the necessity for, you know, Christ being, you know, the, I'm losing my train of thought, but all of that which is part of the Catholic picture. And yet there are people here as believers that said, this is not where we want to be, this is not where we are. And yet the Catholic Church was causing all kinds of injury.
This remnant, I'll call them a remnant, okay. They started with really the Waldensians, you're saying?
A group that eventually became, as I said, you'll follow that line, but yeah.
The timeline's in there.
They're the group that you could go as far back as before any of the others.
Okay, gotcha, thank you.
But you'll have that. But I want you to look at that. I want you to look at it in kind of a, and when you're looking at the curriculum and you say, okay, you come down to page, you know, to page 12, where the papacy and the clergy become very corrupt and immoral, and you know the stage is set. And you come to realize that as much as this immorality, as much as this false teaching was developing, and all of the ongoing Inquisition, there were believers. There were people who lived for God. There were people who were reaching their world for Christ. And there were people dying for their faith. Ray had a question about the Immaculate Conception. I don't know whether any of you have any, but the Immaculate Conception, according to teaching in Catholic Church, is the conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary, free from original sin by virtue of the foreseen merits of her Son. In other words, is backpedaled. And that's, Catholic theology backpedals all the time. And they're not backpedals, but backfills. You have a statement now, but it's not really what the churches believe. So you got to backfill, and you got to put in things, so it all makes sense up to where you are now. Catholic Church teaches that Mary was conceived by normal biological means in the womb of her mother, St. Anne. I don't know where they got St. Anne from. Well, we have the biblical text. That's news to me. But God acted upon her soul, keeping it immaculate. And then I pointed out to Ray when we talked about this, what are the first few words of the Magnificat? The praise of Mary in Luke 1. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior.
Oh.
If, in fact, she had been acted upon and kept immaculate, then she had no need for a Savior. Immaculate conception is commonly confused with the virgin birth. And that is a good point. Christ, she was a virgin. Just flat out. All right? Christ was born, she conceived of the Holy Spirit. And it is from this that we have Christ, the God-man, holy God, holy man, full and complete natures in one person. You understand, these words are very important. You have there is one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus. And you have in him the fullness of the Godhead dwelleth bodily in Colossians. So you have those two natures, one person. Athanasius makes it very clear there is no confusion. Okay? No combining, no blending. They continue to be. They are not separated from each other in that sense that, he did that as God, he did that as man, and he did, he is one person, but with two natures. The mystery of godliness, so Paul writes, and there is a mystery there. There is something that after we've done all of the theological explanation, we still sit back and our brain hurts. And faith is exercised. We're speaking of God. And we're speaking of the Son of God. I went over an ordination. I'm very demanding when it comes to preparation of young men for ordination. I had a young guy in my second church preparing for ordination. And at an anniversary time, years later, he came and he says, he said a few nice things about me. He says, yes, he said, and I always remember Pastor Van Sant, helping me for my ordination. And every time when I would meet with him, I would go home and sit in a corner and suck my thumb. Just, you got to see that what we're looking at here in the depth and the detail of theology. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and there is a place for us to understand that it just exceeds our capacity to fully comprehend. But at the same time, that doesn't release us of the need to learn more and more and understand more and more about who God is and what he has revealed of himself to be known. What he has revealed of himself to be known. Wycliffe, priest in the Roman Catholic Church. Another one of those Catholics. But became very critical of privileged status of the clergy and the luxury and the pomp of the Catholic parishes and ceremonies. When? 1320 to 1384. When was Luther? 1500s. This is 200 years earlier. What was John Wycliffe? Anybody? It's a common phrase. But if you don't know it, it's not common, is it? The morning star of the Reformation. The morning star of the Reformation, John Wycliffe. Is it there?
Yep,
What page?
page 12.
12. Yep.
I would have been surprised if it wasn't there. It just shows you how I can read. Are you sure?
Yep,
Yeah, it's right in the
Next to his
middle.
name.
Right in the middle.
yeah.
Where it says
Where it
John
says John
Wycliffe.
Wycliffe.
Under the early reformers, 1300 to 1400, John Wycliffe,
The
the morning star of the Reformation.
In bold letters.
Bold letters.
So you're screaming at.
Was it?
Point, what point?
It's not a point.
It's not a point.
It's
It's
above
where
what
it
number
is-
one.
It's next to his
Bold
name.
print.
Oh, yeah.
There
Guess
you
it was a
go.
football.
Yeah.
You see, this is the way you don't want to read. I look at John Wycliffe, 1320 to 1384, and then down the page.
Yeah.
You see, it should have been in big, bold, and in parentheses.
It is.
There it is. I got it. Hey, so at any rate, what's he do? He finishes his translation. And that was another thing. Let's hold back the Bible from the reading by the common man, because he'll never understand the Bible. She'll never understand the Bible. And for that matter, the Bible must not be written in any other version than the Latin version. Right? Why? Because it would be translated into vulgar language. Right? So, once again, a restricting of understanding and growth on the part of believers. Wycliffe was not going to have that. So he did a translation of the Vulgate Bible into that vulgar language of English. And man, is it vulgar. He and his associates completed the whole Bible in 1384 with revisions in 88 and 95. Followers were known as Lollards. They attacked many doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. They believed in predestination, the supremacy of the king over the priesthood. See, the popes had come to the place in that stretch of time that we looked at that we moved so rapidly. They had become rulers of Europe. If the pope, the emperors would come to be coronated by a pope, and they would come for permission from the pope. Things had become upside down and inside out. They attacked the notion of temporal power of the church, veneration of saints, sacraments, saying of Mass for the dead, transubstantiation. As for transubstantiation, anybody have any question about that?
No,
That-
it's explained.
Is that the Eucharist becomes the body of Christ?
Yeah.
The
I'm
physical
sorry,
body?
Yes.
That's the communion
Yeah.
thing, the communion thing, Website for you to grab hold of if you want something quick. Let's see if I can come up with the history.
Depending how far you read in this, he does have a little explanation of that too, in here.
In the notes.
Yeah.
Down at the back.
No, I'm gonna tell you what page exactly. Okay,
Where?
let you know, 1 second.
It's page 16.
Yeah. Yes, at the bottom of that, thank you.
On the,
Yeah.
in the notes.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Catholic Church teaches that where the bread and the wine are actually transformed into the actual body and blood of Christ.
Yeah.
No, I just came across a page that I thought was really good. It was from Grace to You, John MacArthur's site. One of the professors there, it was short, it was nice and clean and crisp. transubstantiation basically crucifies Christ every single Mass. It's just that simple. You know, the funny thing is that one of the attacks on the early Christian church, because they were meeting in homes and there were no windows, and so those that were doing spy work, trying to get a sense of what goes on in these Christian groups, all they would hear is, "This is my body." Okay? And they were accused of, killing and eating the flesh of human bodies, because they just didn't know any better. Moish Rosen, you know Moish Rosen? Jews for Jesus. Moish was an unbelieving Jew, and his wife became a believer, and she was going to this church. She says, "Moish, you gotta come, you gotta come, you gotta come." No. So, and you know, for the Jewish belief, you know, they have an annual Passover Seder. It's a big meal. You know, it can run anywhere, in a meal all by itself is 3 hours. And sometimes, if you're gonna just have a family get together, it's just all night. But, you know, it has food. So he finally breaks down. He says, "All right, I'll go." And so what day does he go? It was on Communion Sunday. And so he goes and he sits down and here's this big table up in the front, and it's got a white cloth over the top. Say, you know, we're going to lose sight of this, aren't we? Because we were sitting there and we got these little cups because of COVID. You know, he says, "What is that?" So it's communion. So communion, what's communion? Well, you know, we celebrate the body and blood of Jesus. And so, you know, she's not doing a good job at this. So he's trying to equate this. It's one. And then the preacher says, "And now, you know, we want to remember the body, and we're going to partake of the body, but, you know, he's going on, and this is my body." And he says, "He would kill somebody." And you know, he was really, he says, "I'll tell you something, I honestly was at that point," he says, "it may sound silly to me, but I was just frightened out of my mind. And what have I gotten myself into?" But yeah, it can take, now you think about that. Now that's a funny story, but, you know, how do we get from Jesus' point? But was it not misunderstood in John 6? Some left. Well, you know, this is hard teaching.
It sure was.
And so you get to the whole thing, and, you know, even to the place of Luther. And let's keep in mind that Luther was not like, Lutherans don't believe everything the same way we do. They don't. Okay. And so you have Luther, and you have Langton, who's on the other side of the table. And you know, they're bandying back and forth at this council on the communion. And you've got Langton, he's saying, "In remembrance, in remembrance, in remembrance." And Luther, this is his story, history. He is on the other side of the table, and Luther was somewhat emotional. You know, how much you know about the history of Martin Luther? If you go to his study to this day, you will walk in and you'll see a splash of ink on a wall. It's still there to this day, where he had taken an ink bottle and thrown it at the devil across the way of the study. He was a very emotional person. And he's on the other side, he's beating. He says, "You know, this is my body. This is my body," and he's just beating it, and determined that this was the body of Jesus, and he would never, and he never did yield to that. Always believing that the body and the blood of Jesus was in the elements when they were partaken.
Wow.
Now, you know, there are phases, the Catholic Church, literally becomes And in Lutheranism, this much you can say, it doesn't literally become, it's not becoming flesh on your tongue. It's the body of Christ in spirit. And by now, don't get that confused and don't let yourself get carried away. When we partake of illness, it's in remembrance of a past event. It doesn't become flesh, nor does it become in spirit. It is not transferred, transubstanced, right? But that was one of the teachings. And so Wycliffe, he was at the Council of Constance declared heretic. His writings were banned and burned. He was executed. Body was exhumed later on, burned. Ashes were scattered in the river Swift. I'm not certain why. Like listening to a mob boss say, "I'll kill you," and then I'll really go to work on you. That kind of thing. John Huss. Following, John Huss was considered the first church reformer.
Yep.
Not too many people know about him. Czech priest who led the Bohemian Reformation. Read John Wycliffe's writing in Latin, followed his teachings, and writing strongly influenced Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, a century later. Huss stood against many of the Catholic doctrines, including a doctrine of the Church and the Eucharist. John Huss was burned at the stake in 1415. And it's interesting when you talk about the history of Catholicism and the influence that it has on people to this day. When I pastored in New Jersey, we had one of those, it's an old granite, huge, big building of the past. But with all of the stained glass, all of the looks and feel of like a cathedral. It's a Baptist church. It was built as a Baptist church, but it's just big. Well, not nearly as big as the cathedral in Newark. I don't know how they did it in Newark. It's massive. And to have these people come to Christ from Catholicism. And, it would be, and this has always troubled me because, people make a decision for Christ and, they'll be all excited and then they'll be like that seed that falls on the rocky ground and the things of the world and the things of, different activities, it begins to drain on their passion and their love for God. And, they were all excited at the beginning, they got baptized and everything, and now I only see them once a month. But what day of the month do you think I see them?
Communion?
I could almost, I don't even have to look. I can stand up and I just know who's going to be out there because of their Catholic background, because it's had such an influence, an impact, in spite of the fact that they've left it, in spite of the fact that they'll say, yeah. But I also say this concerning all of the counseling I've made, and I would never marry and perform a wedding for anybody who were not true believers. I never married unbelievers, and I never married two people that I had question about their faith. But I have married people young people particularly, who were edging out of Catholicism. They've made a profession of faith, but they all of their family are still Catholic. And I always found this interesting. I'd sit there and I'd talk with them because the gal, and unfortunately it was always the gal. It was one of our girls, and she'd bring this guy around and say, okay, he'd have to meet her father and he'd have to meet me, her second father. And he said, let's sit down and talk. And we'd talk and I'd say, and I'd go over these things as to the distinctions. Well, what do you really believe? Do you really trust Christ? Oh, yeah. Well, what about your church? You were raised in all of this. Example of that. He said, what do you mean you don't believe that? He says, you don't go to the Father for confession? No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. He said, well, who do you pray to? I pray to God. I pray to Jesus. The answers are right, but yet it's like fresh. It's not as if he'd even been, they'd even been discipled, but they had come through a phase in the latter years before they showed up on our, doorstep, of looking at this theology of the Catholic Church and saying, I've had a Catholic, in my first church, I've had more than one or two or three of them, that said they came to Christ in the midst of a Catholic morning service. And what? Well, they said, we heard so much, and we had, the gospel was being read that morning, and I was sitting there reading it, and it became so obvious to me that this was it, and that Christ, and there was a true moment. They said that was it, and I didn't go back. And I just didn't go back. But some went back because mom or grandmother would go and say, I gotta go, I gotta go. And it comes evening services for us, and then you go to the morning service there, and you go to 3 morning services, and then 2 morning services, and then 1 morning service, and then 5
Yep.
would come. But it has a grip. It has a grip. And it is not the church, please. We'd say it's part of the church history. Well, it's part of the... How do you get to the place that you kill people? How do you get to the place that you lead people astray? How do you get to the place that you interact with politics and the ways and rule of the world? How do you get to this place? And be led by the Holy Spirit of God. You see, you get theological, and you say, well, you can argue about the Holy Spirit, proceeded from the Father. So wait a minute, let's talk about the Holy Spirit. Are you, as being converted, having been truly filled and led by the Spirit of God? Because if you have, then the Spirit of God would not lead you to do this and that and the other, as we've just passed through those most dark ages and restrictive ages for those who yearn and desire to know but have been held back. So, you have the church in church history with a little c. And that's these guys up here. And you got the church with the big C. And it's these guys down here that have been faithful and true to the Bible as the only rule of faith and practice. And now when you read the paperwork I'm handing out, there were some oddities. They weren't dead on. None of us are always dead on. But first ones I hand out to you, I'd like you to just write, just like you did this last week, but in this case, write me 3 paragraphs, 1 paragraph for each one. Write me a little paragraph about the Waldensians as you read through this, and you only get 1 paper on each one, by the way. And then 1 on the Hussites, and then 1, on the Lollards. But I am giving you 2 papers on the Waldensians, only in the sense that I'll give you the Confession of Faith from 1120. Right, that's how far back that Confession of Faith goes. And so... Any questions while I'm wandering around? I'm sure I passed over something you may have thought I should, and you wanted me to address. Next week, I'd like you to start with that page with, if I can read all of it and not skip some of it. Yeah, this is why I retired, you all. Yeah, there was one more thing that we wanted to just touch on, and that was the fall of Constantinople and Gutenberg with the printing press. And again, that was something that was very critical to what would follow and provide Tyndale, which we'll read about next week, but picking up on Reformation on page 14. And let's take it on down and see if we can cover on through to, we only got 5 weeks. And if we get there, that'll be great, but let's try to get to, read through page 23, but I'm thinking maybe, we'll shoot to get through to Coming to America. That's not the movie. And,
We just did one.
so we'll get through the Reformation and the,
Where is it?
Thank you.
Puritans.
I want this thing.
We won't hit the Great Awakening. We'll pick up the following week on the Great Awakening.
How many churches would you feel comfortable in the ministry in?
What
Besides
church?
Baptist?
Myself? Where would I actually, and it's not just a matter of ministry, but where would I actually sign a doctrinal statement? I could probably sign a doctrinal statement even Free Church. They have kind of a latitude on baptism, whether they baptize a child in a different way. I don't know that I could do that. Depends, because I can't be in a church that baptizes infants. That would go against my conviction. A Bible church, there was a time I could be part of a Missionary Alliance church, possibly, but they have become much more pronounced and they're embracing the sign gifts, and I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. Is to minister, let me back this train up and say, look, throughout my entire years of ministry, I have had very, very close fellowship and interaction with guys from Missionary Alliance, conservative Presbyterian churches, evangelical free churches, Assembly of God churches, but we work together, but we don't worship together. In other words, I don't go to their church and worship. And some of those churches, I have preached in an evening free church. I've been invited to preach, and I've gone to preach. I don't have any problem. But that is part of what we call not ecumenical. And by the way, where the word ecumenical is referred to in all of this paperwork that we see here is a unifying, like in the early church of Catholic being one. All right. Today, when we talk of ecumenical, we talk about ecumenicalism and accepting all faiths.
No, that's not it.
So that the ecumenical circle would include Jewish, Muslim, all faith, Hindu, and that's not, no. There was a time when ecumenical was just Christian trying to be one. So I travel in evangelical, and the evangelical National Association of Evangelical for the National Association has 7 points, very simple point, which are very basic statements of faith about salvation by grace, faith alone in Jesus Christ. It doesn't get into the details of what we might necessarily talk about. Doesn't really talk about baptism. It just talks about the basis of salvation in baptism. So, and we've done a lot of. My first church, we raised some $30,000 to put up radio beams to add Christian radio out to Eastern Long Island, and all of our churches contributed to that. And so I was very comfortable with that. I found that I really treasured the fellowship with those guys. They're my brothers in the Lord, and that's what I said. This is our family, and we have different shades. But when you look at the creeds, you say these creeds, well, they don't talk about, they don't talk about the sign gifts, or they don't talk about infant baptism. No, they don't.
No.
But what they do talk about is what all believers believe. And that creates, that's the basis for good unity. I can live